Good morning, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Tuesday, October 28th. I am joined once again by our film study guru, Mr. Kyle Jones, here at 11 Warriors. Mr. Jones, we missed you last week due to the great Amazon Workspaces outage that swept the nation and unfortunately got to even as far as 11 Warriors, or at least the third party service we used to record all our podcasts. But we are back and we're grateful to have you. How are you doing this week? Did you enjoy your bye week?
Lovely bye week. Went to a wedding. Shout out to my guy Jose, former Buckeye track legend himself. Got hitched this past weekend. Good Buckeye always, picks a bye week to get married in the fall. So great times had. A lot of former Bucks there. So great weekend.
Yeah, if you are going to schedule a fall wedding, I suppose you could do much worse than lining it up with a bye week. So major props to Jose for the scheduling on that one. As I alluded to at the top, we did miss Jones last week due to an unfortunate technical issue, but we are grateful to have him back this week. Film study did still end up dropping last Thursday, so hopefully you all enjoyed that. There won't be a film study this Thursday, sad to say. So for the people that always lament the fact that, oh, why are you guys doing a teaser? Why don't you just actually drop the film study? I don't want a video about a video that's going to come out. This is all you get this week. So tough. You're going to have to deal with it. I'm kidding. But
That's right. Bye weeks
Kyle,
are here for a reason. I take bye weeks too. There's no film to study in
yeah,
bye week.
but we will have plenty of film, ideally, coming out of the forthcoming Penn State game this weekend. But we can also talk about what most recently happened relative to Julian Sayin before looking ahead a little bit to the Penn State game. Before we get into all of that, we do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor at the 11 Dubcast and 11 Warriors this Ohio State football season. That would be First Bank of Central Ohio. From game day to workday, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They are locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. So, Mr. Jones, I had been beating the drum going into the Wisconsin game that we wanted to see Ohio State kick it up into another gear. We wanted them to really turn it up. And granted, you wonder if it's better for them to turn it up against opponents that are presumably going to be more competitive than a 24.5 point underdog like Wisconsin that nearly got shut out for a third game in a row this past weekend that Ohio State did shut out for the second game in a row when they played. That being said, it was probably the most impressive performance Julian Sayin has had as a Buckeye, just shy of 400 yards passing. Carnell Tate continues to look like the alternate wide receiver one to the wide receiver one that is Jeremiah Smith. But you don't get to put up those numbers if you don't have somebody putting the ball where it needs to go and slinging dimes the way that Julian Sayin has been. So, given that your film study did touch on Sayin last week, I'm just wondering if you have any additional thoughts relative to what you talked about last week that you would have told us last week that you didn't get to about how good Sayin has been, and if you think that they're going to continue to let it rip with Sayin as we get down the home stretch of this season, or if maybe they dial things back a bit for the next 2 or 3 games of the schedule and then kind of get a little bit more aggressive going into Michigan, potentially the Big Ten championship, and then the college football playoff.
Yeah, I don't see any world where they dial him back. I think that is going his breakout over the last month. I was looking back at the as I was putting together the header photos for my videos. I was realizing I've got a lot of Julian Sayin in the last few weeks, and I needed to mix it up. And so I went with the Carnell Tate, catching the ball over two guys on this first touchdown,
The
which we'll talk about
mossing,
here in a
if you
second.
will.
Yeah, mossing those two DBs, and Tate deserves a ton of credit. Incredible catch. Saying on that throw, that's the best throw he's made in college. Like, it's insane what that throw was. It was not just, on the money in between two defenders. This was him recognizing coverage. This was 3rd and 12. This was a great play dialed up, and it was a pinpoint accuracy ball after, mind you, he'd had to shuffle in the pocket because Austin Saraville kind of got owned on an inside move by the pass rushing Wisconsin end. Not Austin's best. He's been pretty good this year. That was not his best work. But Sayin was able to shuffle around, reset his feet, and keep his eyes downfield. And I think that's the thing that really stands out for a kid at his age. I'm calling him a kid because he's a teenager still, essentially, right? Like he might be 20, but he's certainly not legally old enough to drink. And yet this kid is keeping his eyes downfield, keeping his feet with him. That was one of the things that I really harped on was every time he's going through his reads, you see this a lot with young QBs where their eyes go one way, but their body doesn't follow. And that's what leads to inaccuracy, right? Their feet don't follow, their hips don't follow, which means their arm and the ball don't follow either. He's resetting his feet with his eyes and they're in perfect tandem. And I mean, there's an element of just natural talent there, but there's just an element of evolution and maturity for playing the position that he's showing right now. That is not oh, well, so-and-so's defense sucks, so he's just ripping them apart. And when he plays real defense, it's like, man, those things translate. Like pocket presence translate. Good fundamentals translates. Accuracy translates. So, yeah, they did keep the training wheels on in that first week against Texas, no question. Even into the Washington game, I think they kept the training wheels on. But as you alluded to at the beginning, like this was his best performance because I felt like it was the one where they just took the training wheels off the most, right? Like he threw it, 42 times, I think it was, something like that. And he threw it. Most of those throws, or not most, but a huge portion were RPOs, meaning they were run plays that had a pass attached to them. And earlier in the season, those weren't they weren't live, meaning they would run the route, but he was not allowed to make that throw because they didn't trust that he could make the decision in real time to say like, hey, is this guy coming? Can you deliver the ball accurately with that much pressure on you? And now they've started to build up that trust. So they basically said, great, you're really comfortable there. Let it rip, man. Like go for it. Yes, we want to be able to establish the run, but if we're getting JJ outside against a corner who's going to play off coverage, we're going to hit that quick hitch all day long. We're going to hit that quick out. We're going to hit that slant, whatever that route might be to 4 or 17, because that's what this offense does best. I think I was a little worried coming into the season, like, okay, Day's going to give up the play calling yet again. He doesn't have Chip Kelly. What is this offense going to be? And it's a Ryan Day special all day long. Right. Like it is Ryan Day's passing game. We're seeing it come alive. And I think, and the reason to answer your question that I went with, I don't see a reason it goes back is because this is Ryan Day's offense. And that's what he wants to do. It's what he builds his program to be able to do. It's why they recruit these, cyborgs to play outside at receiver. I don't see a world where they go, you know what? I think we'd rather give CJ Donaldson 20 carries than, get the ball to 4 and 17. And that's not a knock on CJ Donaldson. It's just, you've got like 2 all-world players outside. You've got a guy that can get them the ball. And so I think when we get to that last game, obviously this weekend's going to be a good test simply because Penn State has so much talent, regardless of the chaos around their team. They still have NFL guys on that roster. Like the NFL is going to tell you in 6 months that Penn State had a good roster. They just will. So like you still have that aspect of it of like you're going to play maybe the best talent that you're going to see in the regular season this year. So you got to show up, and I think it'll be a good test and a good reminder of what's going to be coming later in the season as this team prepares for the playoffs. But as everyone starts to circle and look forward to that Michigan game, to that potential Indiana game, honestly, which is a thing I can't believe I'm saying out loud. That's where you start to say, what is this team going to be? What are they going to, and what's this offense going to look like? What's the identity? I think the identity is trust in 10 and let him distribute it to those studs outside.
Yeah, it was, as you alluded to, 42 passing attempts for Sayin in this last game is the most that any Ohio State quarterback has had in a game since that fateful Rose Bowl that C.J. Stroud had against Utah, where they had, I think, 3 wide receiver ones. Actually, no, I believe that was when Garrett Wilson and Olave were sitting out. So they basically went to JSN, or they were that was the preview game for what Marvin Harrison Jr. was going to become. But in any event, that was also a game where they were largely throwing out of necessity to stay in it, given the own problems they were having on defense still at that point in the season. It was kind of surprising for them to uncork 42 pass attempts. That's, you think about it, I mean, it's one thing to phrase it how I just did with going back to the Rose Bowl in 2021, 22, but that's more passing attempts in a game than Kyle McCord ever got, and it's more than Will Howard ever got. And for them to feel comfortable with saying at this stage in his career to let it rip. And yeah, I did a lot of sandbagging of Wisconsin, but credit to them. One of the games that maybe some Ohio State fans had on during the bye week, Oregon was struggling a little bit with Wisconsin, hosting Wisconsin as opposed to playing in Camp Randall. And that Duck offense that some people would argue is maybe even more impressive than Ohio State's to a certain extent, only got 21 points up on that defense and kind of got pushed around on the line of scrimmage in a way that maybe makes you feel a little bit better about how the run game kind of hit a little more turbulence against this Wisconsin front, to where maybe they felt like it's just better for us to throw as much as possible and potentially use the pass to set up the run. So leaning into your strengths certainly isn't anything to be upset about. And I'm glad that Ohio State seems to have finally done that. It remains to be seen if they will use the next handful of games to continue trying to tweak what's right or keep showing their stuff. But I'm not going to shake a stick at it either way. I'm just grateful that we've seen the potential now, as opposed to speculating on, are they going to lean into that and what does that look like? We've kind of seen what the ceiling can be when they execute, and it's Julian Sayin missing only 6 completions out of 42 attempts and nearly scraping 400 yards. So I would certainly like to see more of that. It'll be interesting to see if that takes shape against Penn State this weekend. The betting line would seem to indicate that is what's going to happen, because Penn State is something like 20.5 point underdogs to Ohio State, which if you had said that a month ago when Frames Janklin was still on the job, I don't know how many people would have agreed with you that that is an accurate forecast for how that should play out. Speaking of Penn State, though, another theme that we've had that I've tried to ask you about during this season is obviously the comparisons between what's going on with Penn State's defense under Jim Knowles relative to what happened in Columbus under Jim Knowles last season and what is happening this season under Matt Patricia were going to be inevitable. The comparisons invite themselves. And I closed the show yesterday by recommending that people go check out a piece that Dan Hope did on 11warriors.com that published Sunday, in which he directly dug up several different metrics for Matt Patricia's defense compared to where Jim Knowles' Penn State defense ranks this year. And it's quite alarming, not just how many that Ohio State ranks number one overall in outright, but the chasm between where Ohio State is relative to where Penn State is, and how Ohio State has somehow exceeded expectations despite turning over a defensive coordinator role to someone that, as much as we are lauding Matt Patricia at this point, there was heavy speculation and skepticism, I think, from a lot of people about how he was going to fill those shoes, as Knowles was almost, I don't want to say universally, but I think the average common college football fan coming out of Ohio State winning the national championship would have said that's the best defensive coordinator in college football for all his faults. And he is leaving to go to a program that is bringing back a lot of talent on that side of the ball. You would think they're going to be one of, if not the best units in the country in that regard, given the marriage of those two camps. And it just simply hasn't played out that way, to the point that we've seen James Franklin dismissed, and we've seen Ohio State really cement itself as not just the best defense in college football, but a historically great one to this point in the season. That being said, I won't go down the full list of where Ohio State is ranking number one and where Penn State is maybe coming up short relative to Ohio State. I would recommend that you go check out the piece for yourself if you want to see that. But the one area that I did think is interesting is that once you get to the end of that list, the two last areas where both camps have sort of struggled, and I struggle's a bit of a hesitant word relative to Ohio State because they've done well, I think, pretty much across the board. There's just two areas where they haven't been stellar outright number one in the country compared to almost everyone everywhere else. And it's two areas where Knowles has not only continued to struggle at Penn State, but had difficulties with this defense for Ohio State last season before they really turned things around for the playoff. And that's relative to sacks and tackles for loss and turnovers. Those were the two biggest criticisms for Ohio State coming out of the regular season last year. It was something that I recognized was a big reason that they lost to Oregon the first time that was going to need to be corrected going into the Rose Bowl rematch, and something that they without question completely turned around in the Rose Bowl relative to when they played Oregon the first time, and there was a big metamorphosis for that. So at the moment, Ohio State, they currently have 46 total tackles for a loss and 21 team sacks. That ties for 20th best in the country relative to sacks, 43rd in the country for tackles for a loss. They're actually tied with Penn State at 67th overall in the country with 9 total takeaways. So my question for you is, how confident are you that in the same way that we saw Ohio State's defense step its game up in the postseason against a higher level of competition to correct those shortcomings and actually make those strong points of the defense and differences in the games that they won, do you feel good that this defense, as great as it's been, is going to be able to step it up even further and make those, if you want to call them weak points, turn them into strengths in areas where we can be confident as fans that they're not going to fall short in their quest to defend the national championship?
It's a great question. I'm fairly confident there's still answers in that have not been uncovered, and in Matt Patricia's toolbox. And the way I think about it is very much they are. It's not that they're rolling out a new game plan every week where it's entirely bespoke and unique in the sense of like, whoa, there's a guy lining up there. He's never lined up there before, and he only lined up there this week. Like you're seeing a lot of stuff getting used in different mixes. And what I mean by that is, like years ago, I remember I'll never forget writing the cause of death after Mac Jones and Alabama and Steve Sarkisian just destroyed the Kerry Combs defense in that national championship. Like I remember like calling myself like the mortician in the sense of like it was my job or the coroner to be, to basically like declare the cause of death, do the autopsy, let's like uncover it. And I remember writing an article because it felt like Ohio State that year on defense just had a fastball. And I talked about pitchers. And so bear with me for a second. For readers who've read my stuff for a long time, this might sound familiar. Is like that team had one pitch, and against hitters who can't hit a fastball, it was great. You were like, wow, this is awesome. When you get to the big leagues, everyone can hit a fastball. You need a second pitch. Jim Knowles, eventually last year, what made that defense so good is that they had 2 or 3 pitches. And it's very similar to anybody who's watching playoff baseball the last month. When you get into crunch time, it's really about the relievers. And what do relievers do? Relievers throw 2 pitches. And it's basically, I'm going to throw you this cutter or I'm going to throw you a curveball in the dirt. And they're both good pitches, but that's literally the only pitch I have. Those are the only 2 pitches I have. And they're awesome. But the longer you see it, the more you're going to start to pick up on it, right? Now, in one time through the lineup, it's impossible to pick up on these 2 because you're like, I can get a cutter at the hands or a curveball in the dirt. I don't know which one it's going to be. They look the same, and then suddenly I'm, grasping at air. And I think there was an element along, and this is going to, some people are going to hate this, and I think it really, I don't even like this necessarily because I think it diminishes what the players did from an effort standpoint. I think that was a huge part of it was the players buying in and just going all out effort wise. And also that was a very mature defense that had played a lot of reps. And so they were ready for that moment, mentally, emotionally. So I think that aspect from a scheme perspective, though, you had 2 or 3 pitches. What has impressed me about Patricia is it's more like a starting pitcher throughout the course of the season, right? Where a starting pitcher, and again, for baseball fans, you're like, why are you talking about this? But a starting pitcher, they're going to have 3, 4, 5 pitches. In one day, they're just going to rely on that slider. And then the next time through the lineup, they're going to rely on the fastball. And the next time through the lineup, they're going to throw a changeup. And then you're going to get to the next game and you're like, wait, this guy's throwing all changeups. What's going on? I knew he had it, but he only threw it 3% of the time. And suddenly we're getting it, 60% of the time. And that's been the piece where we talk about a bespoke defense is you're seeing similar concepts, similar formation, similar personnel groups, similar concepts in the secondary, but the mix is totally different week to week. And so it's really hard to scout for that and to prepare for that when you expect them to bring 7 on a pressure and then suddenly they're playing cover 1 man with Caleb Downs sitting as the rat, to take away any crosses. You're like, well, the play we called was not to beat this defense. It was to beat that other defense. And now this play sucks. So we don't have a lot of answers now as an offense. And like, that's the issue. And that's what we're seeing Matt Patricia do to offenses as the year goes on. As long as he's able to stay away from getting too, tendency reliant, you're starting to see these tendencies week after week after week. And every week it's been different. So I don't expect that to happen. It would take a big course correction or course change for that to suddenly be like, well, on third down, Ohio State's going to, bring 7, like not happening. And so because of that, I feel pretty confident that what they're doing defensively from a schematic standpoint is going to be, well, we know they can't hit sliders, so we're throwing sliders. We know that they can't hit high fastballs, so we're throwing high fastballs because no, we might not have the best slider or the best high fastball. We've got a pretty good one. And even if we do, and they get a hit, in this instance, they get some yards, Caleb Downs is there to clean it up, guys. So they get 7 yards on a run play. Guess who's there? There were a couple instances against Wisconsin where Wisconsin actually like successfully blocked a play and you're like, okay, cool. They're going to get 6-7 yards. And a missile wearing a number 2 jersey just shows up from the side and takes this guy out. Like, that also helps. That's also a big reason why Jim Knowles was so well praised, because he had that guy. And as long as you have that guy, your defense is probably going to be pretty good. So we can talk about scheme. We can talk about all that. It helps when you have an eraser who, like, even when the things don't go to plan, you got an eraser who can help clean up the mistakes.
Yeah, I think, people like to talk about the best offenses are structured around the concept of taking what the defense gives you in terms of just recognizing where the soft spots are, and if not changing the play when you line up in accordance with what is there, just kind of orchestrating the rhythm of your calls based on the pattern that you've noticed of where they're struggling. I'm not sure how you would flip that phrase for the defense in terms of just capitalizing on what the offense gives you, but rather than give you more where you recognize that they're struggling to succeed. I feel like that this unit, in the same way that last year was, but maybe just didn't do as consistently, this unit is well equipped to take away what the offense is not only succeeding with, but then force them into situations that they're not comfortable performing in order for them to succeed, and then they ultimately don't. That was
Yeah.
certainly the case against Wisconsin, where they just got into a script that they weren't going to be able to handle. The Minnesota and the Washington games, in both of those instances, it felt like that they were spending the first handful of drives trying to figure out what they were going to be good at, and then making sure that as the game got into the later stages that they were taking that stuff away, and then ultimately neither of those teams got in the end zone and got limited to 9 points combined. So I think that that's a product of this team being historically great in terms of giving up the least amount of points combined since 1993, I think, which was the year I was born. So it's it's the best Ohio State defense of my lifetime by any measure, and it's been a pleasure to watch them. And I would certainly hope that they're able to keep that up this weekend against Penn State. But going even further than that, based on a lot of what you just said, I think I'm also confident that although they haven't been, creme de la creme in terms of sacks and turnovers, the fact that they've been as good as they've been, period, they don't necessarily need to thrive and capitalize on that stuff in order to, play the level of defense that they've had. You would think that to make the difference against the great teams, that that's going to need to be there. But I'm confident that in the same way that they were able to step up and adjust as the competition level rose last year, we're going to see something similar with this unit this year. The best is yet to come, and what's already come so far has been pretty good. So I look forward even more to seeing what we have in store for this unit down the road. But one game at a time. It'll be quite a homecoming for Jim Knowles this coming weekend. Chase made a joke, and I asked him to save it for the Dubcast, and we didn't end up getting to make it. We forgot it, so I'm just going to say it here. Forgive me, Chase, for stealing your bit, but he said it would be great if they did if they gave Jim Knowles his like championship ring or just kind of like pressed it upon him during the game. If they did like a video tribute for him during the game, especially because he actually blew off the ceremony the day that he went to Penn State, just like drop it in the middle of the game, like between quarters or something, especially if Ohio State's already up like 14 or 17 to nothing or something. That would be so rich. I really hope that they pay tribute to Jim Knowles in some way, shape, or form right before stomping the Nittany Lions into the ground. So we'll see what they have in store for Mr. Knowles and his cups of coffee on Saturday. But we have big noon kickoff to look forward to. It'll be a cathartic game, I think, in some ways for people that weren't thrilled with the way that the Jim Knowles era ended at Ohio State, purely from a political standpoint. Obviously, the way it ended on the field was pretty good, any way that you slice it. So, thank you, Mr. Knowles, but apologies in advance. I hope that they, as Mr. Day likes to say, hang 100 on you this weekend. So we look forward to that. And I'm sure Jones will look forward to that too, because that'll leave plenty of entertaining film for him to break down on next week's installment of Film Study. Our apologies that there won't be one this week, but cut the guy a break. He works pretty hard, and the content that he puts out is pretty consistently elite, and we're grateful to him for it. So let him enjoy the week off, but he still made time to come on the Dubcast and talk to us about what's going on in that big brain of his. So Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for tuning into the 11 Dubcast. We'll be back tomorrow with Andy Anders to talk the latest on what's developing around Ohio State athletics. We'll be back with Dan Hope tomorrow to talk about the Big Ten Power Rankings. Andy will be on the Thursday show, and then we'll have someone back Friday to preview the Penn State game itself. But until then, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care, folks.